Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mr. Jobs English podcast. I'm Mia, and I'm really happy you're here with us again.
And I'm James. It feels great to have you with us. Today, we're diving into a warm, delicious, cozy profession that honestly makes me hungry just thinking about it.
Same here. We're talking about bakers, people who work early in the morning, use special ingredients, operate big ovens, and prepare breads, pastries, cakes, and all kinds of amazing treats.
And as always, we're right here together in the same place, side by side, ready to bring you lots of beginner-friendly and intermediate English vocabulary connected to this real job.
Exactly. And we're keeping everything natural and smooth, like a real conversation, just the way our listeners like it. So let's start by thinking about what a baker's day usually looks like. One important verb is to knead, which means pressing and folding dough with your hands. It's a simple word, but English learners often don't know it.
And it's super visual, too. When you knead dough, you push it, fold it, stretch it, and repeat. You can imagine making bread at home or watching someone in a bakery do it. Knead sounds like need, but with a silent K. English does that sometimes just to keep things interesting.
Bakers also mix ingredients. That's a very basic expression, but it appears in so many everyday situations. If someone says mix the ingredients, it means combine them in a bowl. Flour, sugar, butter, eggs, yeast, whatever the recipe needs.
And speaking of yeast, that's an important baking word. Yeast is a tiny organism that makes dough rise. When dough rises, it becomes bigger and lighter. Bakers say, let the dough rise, or the dough is rising. It's a great verb for our listeners.
There's also the word dough itself, spelled D-O-U-G-H, with a silent G-H. English really loves silent letters in the kitchen. The pronunciation is just dough, like the animal.
And here's another useful word, batch. A baker might say, I made a batch of cookies, meaning one group or one quantity prepared at the same time. They might make many batches during the day, one batch of bread, one batch of croissants, one batch of muffins.
And because bakers usually start working while most people are still sleeping, vocabulary like early shift, pre-dawn, or before sunrise can appear in conversations. But don't worry, we'll keep things simple and natural. Just knowing that bakers often work early helps you understand English sentences like, I start my shift before the sun comes up.
And, of course, they also set the oven, check the temperature, or preheat the oven. Preheat is a super short verb but important. It means warming the oven to the right temperature before putting anything inside.
Another important word is bakery, the place where bakers work. A bakery can be small, local and family-owned, or large and industrial. But the vocabulary stays similar. Ovens, counters, trays, racks, mixers, rolling pins.
Oh yeah, rolling pin is a classic object. It's a cylinder used to flatten dough. Bakers also roll out dough. That's a phrasal verb our listeners should know. Roll out the dough means flatten it with the rolling pin.
And while doing all this, bakers often work in a warm environment because of the heat from the ovens. So the expression hot kitchen can appear. It doesn't mean angry chefs. It literally means the temperature is warm.
I like that we can use these words in little moments of real life. Imagine someone saying, I woke up early like a baker today, or this kitchen is as hot as a bakery. These expressions help listeners use job vocabulary in everyday speech.
Another everyday expression is freshly baked. It means something was baked recently. Freshly baked bread, freshly baked cookies. It always sounds delicious.
And there's also pastry, which means sweet baked items like muffins, croissants, Danish, or tarts. And the person who specializes in pastries is sometimes called a pastry chef, but for this episode, we're focusing on bakers in general.
A good vocabulary word is glaze, which is a sweet coating you put on top of pastries or donuts. Bakers might glaze donuts or add a sugar glaze. The pronunciation is like glaze.
And one more word, crumb. That's the soft inside part of bread or cake. People might say the crumb is soft or this bread has a perfect crumb. It's useful for food descriptions.
Now, let's bring in a little story, the way we always do, to make everything feel natural and easy to understand. Imagine this. You walk into a small bakery early in the morning, and the air smells like warm bread. A baker is kneading dough on a wooden table. He greets you with a friendly, "Good morning," even though he probably started working at 4 a.m. He shows you trays of fresh pastries he just pulled out of the oven. You ask, "What's that one called?" And he says, "This is a cinnamon roll. It's freshly baked." He uses a rolling pin to prepare the next batch while explaining that he needs to preheat the oven again because the temperature changed.
That moment is filled with vocabulary our listeners can use. Words like tray, fresh, batch, knead, dough, oven, preheat, rolling pin, and ingredients. When these words appear naturally in a story, they're much easier to remember.
Exactly. And now imagine the baker lifting a heavy baking tray using oven mitts, which are insulated gloves that protect hands from heat. That's another useful word, oven mitts. You might even use it at home.
And he probably places the tray on a cooling rack so the pastries don't stay too warm. That's a real bakery term, and it makes sense. A rack where things cool down.
While explaining everything, the baker tells you that yeast makes the dough rise and that each batch needs time to rest. Let the dough rest is another expression. It means letting the dough sit calmly before shaping or baking it.
And we can add the verb to shape. Bakers shape dough into loaves, rolls, or buns. English learners might know shape as a noun, but as a verb, it's super useful.
I like that. And sometimes they decorate cakes or pastries. That makes the word decoration part of this job's vocabulary too.
And don't forget the phrase, to set the timer. Bakers always set the timers so nothing burns. If you ever hear someone say, "I forgot to set the timer," you know trouble is coming.
Definitely. Now, bringing all of this together, the world of a baker mixes early hours, warm ovens, soft dough, delicious smells, and careful technique. It's physical work, but creative too.
And for English learners, it's a great profession to study because the vocabulary overlaps with cooking, restaurants, coffee shops, and even simple conversations at home.
And that's what we want for our listeners. Vocabulary that's useful in real life, not just in a classroom.
Absolutely. And I think the smell of bread in the air is already making this episode feel extra cozy.
Same here. I could go for a croissant right now.
Or a cinnamon roll.
Or both.
Perfect. That's the spirit.
We hope you're enjoying the experience so far, learning naturally through our conversation.
And we're just getting started because there's so much more to explore in this profession.
Ready for more?
Always. You know, the more we talk about bakers, the more I feel like this profession is one of the most underrated and fascinating ones out there. People only see the final product, the bread, the pastries, the cakes, but they don't realize how much technique, timing, and precision go into every single item.
Exactly. And something I really love is how bakers need to understand texture. Texture is how something feels, soft, firm, sticky, smooth. And in baking, texture is everything. If the dough is too sticky, a baker might add more flour. If it's too dry, they might add more water. So the verb adjust is important too. Bakers adjust recipes based on temperature, humidity, or the specific ingredients of the day.
Oh, humidity. Great word. Humidity affects how dough behaves. On a humid day, dough absorbs more moisture from the air, so bakers really need to pay attention. They might say, "The dough is too wet today," or "I need to adjust the recipe because the air is humid."
Exactly. And the verbs measure and weigh are also essential. Bakers don't guess. They measure flour, sugar, salt, and other ingredients with precision. If a recipe says 500 grams of flour, you can't just throw in a handful and hope for the best. You need to weigh it.
And that brings us to scales, the tool used to weigh ingredients. Sometimes you'll hear kitchen scale or digital scale. A baker might say, put the bowl on the scale or weigh the butter before mixing.
Speaking of bowls, another expression is mixing bowl, a large bowl used to combine ingredients. A baker might place the dough in a mixing bowl, mix everything thoroughly, or scrape the sides of the bowl. That verb scrape means removing everything stuck to a surface, usually with a spatula.
And spatula is another great word. English learners often know it, but they don't realize how flexible the meaning is. In baking, a spatula is used to fold ingredients, mix gently, or scrape the bowl.
Right. And you just mentioned the verb fold. That's a baking technique where you gently mix ingredients without stirring aggressively. You lift and turn the mixture carefully. It's used a lot with whipped cream, egg whites, or delicate batters.
Batter, yes, that's another important term. Batter is a mixture that's more liquid than dough, used for cakes, pancakes, or muffins. If it pours easily, it's a batter. If it's solid enough to shape with your hands, it's dough.
I love how these simple distinctions help learners understand the language of cooking and baking. And even if someone doesn't want to be a baker, the vocabulary shows up on cooking shows, in recipes, or in conversations with friends.
Absolutely. And one phrase I hear all the time is golden brown. Bakers often say, bake until golden brown, which means a soft brown color on the surface when something is perfectly cooked.
And it smells amazing. Another word I really enjoy teaching is aroma. The aroma of fresh bread or pastries fills the entire bakery. A baker might say, the aroma means the batch is ready, or the aroma tells me it's almost done.
And you reminded me of the verb rise, which we mentioned earlier. There's also the expression double in size used in recipes. Bakers might say, let the dough rise until it doubles in size.
And after that, they sometimes punch down the dough, which sounds aggressive, but is actually part of the process. It means removing air bubbles by gently pressing the dough after the first rise.
In North America, especially in the U.S., bakers might also prepare bagels or donuts, which have a slightly different process. Bagels are boiled before baking, and donuts are often fried. So the verbs boil and fry come into the conversation too.
In Canada, especially in some regions, bakeries make a lot of butter tarts, which are sweet pastry cups filled with sugar, butter, and syrup, and bakers need to fill the shells before baking the tarts. That verb fill and the noun shells are part of baking vocabulary too.
And cakes introduce another set of useful verbs: pour, spread, layer, and frost. Frosting means covering a cake with a sweet cream layer. You might hear frost the cake, spread the frosting, or add a second layer.
And then we have icing, which can be thinner and shinier than frosting. If a baker says add icing, it usually means a sweet glaze-like topping.
We're giving our listeners so many words they can use in real situations. And I love that. That's exactly the goal of this podcast, teaching English through real jobs.
Let's imagine another natural moment inside a bakery to help everything stick. Picture a baker checking the dough early in the morning. He touches it lightly and says, "The dough feels ready." Then he divides it into equal pieces. The verb divide is useful. He might divide dough into small rolls or into loaves. Some dough is shaped into baguettes, some into buns. And after shaping each piece, he places them on a baking sheet, another useful term. Baking sheets are flat metal trays used inside the oven.
And then he slides the baking sheet into the oven. Sometimes bakers say, slide it in, because the tray moves easily across the metal rails inside the oven.
After baking, he removes the tray using oven mitts and places the bread on a cooling rack. And while everything cools, he starts another batch because baking is constant. It's always happening in cycles.
Another word you hear a lot is ingredients list. Recipes always begin with a list of ingredients. Bakers know their ingredients by heart. They don't always need written recipes because years of practice make everything feel natural.
Speaking of practice, bakers often talk about consistency. Not the texture of food, although that's important, but consistency in results. A good baker can make the same bread taste the same every single day.
And to do that, they need to monitor the oven. That's a great verb. Monitor means watch something carefully. Monitor the temperature, monitor the baking time, or monitor the dough.
And sometimes they test the dough by pressing gently with their fingers. If it springs back, it's ready. Spring back is a great phrasal verb because it means return to its original shape.
I love that one. And then there's the verb whisk, which means mixing quickly using a whisk, a tool with metal loops. You whisk eggs, whisk cream, whisk sugar and butter together.
And sift is another important verb. Bakers sift flour to remove lumps and make it lighter. The thing they use is called a sifter or sometimes a fine mesh sieve.
And after sifting, they might combine dry ingredients and combine wet ingredients. These expressions appear in almost every recipe.
Dry ingredients are things like flour, sugar, salt, baking powder. Wet ingredients are things like eggs, milk, water, melted butter.
Then there's the action to garnish, which means adding decoration on top of something like powdered sugar, fruit slices, or nuts.
And bakers sometimes prepare special orders like birthday cakes or wedding cakes. That brings in vocabulary like custom order, design, details, and decoration.
And because it's a job that involves customers, bakers also use everyday hospitality language, like, "How can I help you? Would you like anything else? Fresh out of the oven. We have a new batch coming soon."
I love fresh out of the oven. It's a phrase you can use for so many things, metaphorically too. Like, here's my fresh out of the oven idea.
That's true. And for a customer, nothing beats the moment when the baker says, "These just came out." It sounds magic.
And that magic is created through technique, timing, patience, and a lot of waking up before sunrise.
And now that we've brought so much vocabulary and natural conversation around this profession, I think our listeners are starting to really understand the world of bakers.
Definitely. And I love how warm and pleasant this profession feels. Maybe it's all the carbs.
Probably. And I love that this job lets us teach English that people will actually use.
Absolutely. And it feels like we're wrapping up beautifully here while keeping the flow completely natural, just the way we need.
Perfect. I'm ready to take this to the final block whenever you are.
Same here. You know, every time we talk about baking, I end up craving something sweet. But I also love how this profession gives us such rich vocabulary. And there's still so much about a baker's work that people don't usually see, especially behind the scenes in a real bakery production area.
For sure. Most people only see the beautiful bread at the front of the shop, the fresh loaves, the pastries, the cookies, but they don't imagine the hours of preparation, the timing, the precision. And something that fascinates me is how bakers think in terms of batches. A batch is a group of items baked together. So instead of thinking, "I'll make some bread," they think, "I'll make one batch of 20 loaves."
Yes, that's something I learned when visiting a bakery training center in Toronto. The instructor kept saying things like, "This batch needs more hydration," or "This batch needs a longer fermentation." And at first, beginners looked confused because the baker wasn't talking about a single loaf. He was talking about a whole group that behaves as one unit.
Speaking of hydration, that's a crucial concept. Hydration refers to the percentage of water in relation to the amount of flour. So for example, a dough with high hydration is wetter, stickier, and produces bread with big air pockets.
Those big air pockets are called an open crumb. I learned that word when I tried making focaccia at home. The recipe said, for an open crumb, use high hydration. And I thought, okay, that sounds scientific.
It does sound scientific, but that's the reality. Baking is a blend of science and art. Now, another term that's important is gluten development. Gluten is the protein in flour that gives dough elasticity. When bakers knead dough, they're helping gluten develop so the dough becomes stretchy instead of breaking apart.
And kneading is the classic movement. Pressing, folding, turning. It's almost meditative to watch. But industrial bakeries often use mixers to knead large amounts of dough, especially spiral mixers. The spiral action is gentle but strong, perfect for big batches.
And once the dough develops enough gluten, the baker lets it rest. That's called bulk fermentation. And it's one of the most magical steps because the dough rises, expands, gets airy, and gains flavor. Yeast becomes active during fermentation, producing gas and aroma.
And temperature control is everything. If the environment's too cold, fermentation slows down. If it's too warm, the dough rises too fast and loses structure. That's why many bakeries have proofing cabinets, temperature-controlled spaces where dough can rise properly.
Proofing is another great word. Proofing is the final rise before the dough goes into the oven. Bakers proof baguettes, croissants, rolls. It's the stage when the dough gets lighter and more delicate.
And when proofing goes wrong, the final product changes completely. Underproofed dough becomes dense and heavy. Overproofed dough collapses when baked. So bakers really need to understand timing. Timing is like their superpower.
Absolutely. And their day is usually built around the timer. The timer becomes their best friend. Bread in the oven? Timer. Dough resting? Timer. Butter chilling? Timer.
Butter chilling is important, especially for laminated doughs like croissants and puff pastry. Laminated dough is made by folding layers of dough and butter to create dozens or even hundreds of thin layers. When baked, those layers puff up, creating that crispy, flaky texture everyone loves.
And the tool bakers use for that folding process is usually a rolling pin. But some professional bakeries have sheeters, machines that roll the dough to a precise thickness.
And once the dough is shaped, croissants rolled, pastries cut, baguettes scored, they go into the oven. And here comes another essential vocabulary word: steam injection. Many bakery ovens inject steam at the start of the baking process. Steam helps create a shiny crust and prevents the surface from drying too fast.
Speaking of crust, I find it funny how everyone has a crust preference. Some people love a thick, crunchy crust, others prefer a soft crust. And bakers adjust their recipes to match what customers want. Even something simple like a bread roll can be made in dozens of variations.
And that customer interaction is part of the job, too. Bakers often talk to customers, recommend items, explain ingredients, or answer questions like, is this gluten-free? Or does this contain nuts? They need to know their products, especially because allergies are serious.
And food safety is a whole area of vocabulary. Words like hygiene, contamination, expiration date, storage temperature, all essential for any food-related profession.
Yes, and every bakery must follow strict regulations. For example, ingredients need to be labeled correctly, surfaces must be cleaned constantly, and baked goods have to be stored the right way to stay fresh. And freshness is another key word. Bread loses freshness quickly because it doesn't usually contain preservatives.
That's why some bakeries bake multiple times a day. Morning batch, afternoon batch, evening batch, and each batch requires planning.
It reminds me of a small bakery I visited during a trip to Vancouver. The owner told me that he organizes his day backwards. Instead of saying, I'll start baking at 2 a.m., he says, I want fresh croissants ready by 7 a.m., so counting backwards, I need to prepare the dough at this time, laminate at that time, proof at that time. He builds the schedule from the final goal.
That's so smart, and that backward planning is pretty common among bakers. They respect the dough's timing more than their own. Dough dictates the rhythm.
And speaking of rhythm, bakers often work with several doughs at once. Maybe one dough is proofing, another is mixing, another's resting. And they remember everything. It's impressive.
And it requires multitasking. Bakers constantly switch between tasks. Scaling ingredients, shaping dough, checking the oven, packaging products, preparing displays. And scaling is another important word. To scale ingredients means to measure them precisely, usually with a digital scale. Baking requires accuracy. A few extra grams of flour or water can change everything.
It's not like cooking where you can improvise with a bit more salt or a bit less oil. Baking is mathematical, and professional bakers follow formulas instead of recipes. Formulas give ingredient percentages, allowing bakers to adjust batch sizes without losing balance.
And they often use a term called baker's percentage. In baker's percentage, the amount of flour is always 100%, and all other ingredients are calculated relative to the flour. So, for example, a dough with 2% salt means 2 grams of salt for every 100 grams of flour.
It makes scaling easier. And it helps them maintain consistency, another keyword. Consistency in product quality, texture, flavor. Customers expect the same cinnamon roll taste every time.
Oh, cinnamon rolls. Now I'm hungry.
Me too. They're so good. And cinnamon rolls have their own vocabulary too. Filling, glaze, icing, swirl.
Swirl is such a satisfying word. It's the spiral shape in many pastries, and bakers need to make perfect swirls for visual appeal.
And visual appeal matters. Bakeries rely a lot on presentation. A shiny fruit tart, a beautifully scored sourdough loaf, a perfectly risen muffin. All of that attracts customers.
And scoring is another must-know word. Scoring means cutting the surface of the dough before baking. It allows the dough to expand without cracking and helps control the shape. And bakers use a special blade called a lame.
It looks like a tiny razor blade on a handle, and with that tool, bakers create designs. Simple lines, curves, even artistic patterns.
And after everything is baked, there's still packaging. Bakers prepare paper bags, pastry boxes, labels, stickers, and some bakeries wrap items individually.
And then comes customer service again. Serving people, answering questions, handling payments, recommending the fresh batch that just came out of the oven. It's a complete job that mixes physical work, creativity, technique, and communication.
And honestly, after walking through all that vocabulary, I feel like our listeners can now understand a full bakery tour in English without difficulty.
And maybe even order like a pro.
Before we wrap up today, I want to say something to our listeners. If you're enjoying these episodes and learning new words for your profession or your dream job,
Yes, tell them.
just follow the podcast, hit the like button, and share which profession you want us to explore next.
We love seeing your suggestions, and it really helps us make episodes that fit your goals.
Absolutely. And before we say goodbye, let's give a quick natural recap. When we talk about bakers, we talk about dough, flour, hydration, fermentation, proofing, crust, crumb, kneading, scaling, batches, ovens, steam, laminated doughs, timing, consistency.
And we talk about the art and science behind every bread and pastry. It's a profession full of rhythm, skill, patience, and passion. And learning this vocabulary opens a whole new world for English learners.
I love this conversation.
Me too. And to everyone listening,
Take care, everyone. See you next time.
bye.